There was once a rich nobleman, known far and wide for his great hospitality and generosity. People who considered themselves to be his friends, or who he himself considered to be his friends, but proved otherwise, flew to his sumptuous house on a regular basis to take advantage of the banquets he would hold there. They were also attracted to him for the reason that he was very lavish in handing out gifts, loans, and letters of credit. Such a way of proceeding went on for many years, and as far as the nobleman was concerned, all was well. The fact that his friends were as quick to seek favors from him as to come to his table and praise him did not bother him in the least. Indeed, his generosity and hospitality knew no bounds. When some raised objections to this, he would merely reply that the very essence of friendship was to have no concerns with the happiness and well-being of the friend. Furthermore, he argued that if he happened to possess what his friends lacked, then giving to them was clearly the way to prove his friendship. Finally, he would often claim that if the situation were reversed, each and every one of his friends would be happy to do exactly the same for him. Now, it so happened that, unknown to the nobleman, his resources were being depleted. Though he gave credit out to his friends, he himself relied on credit to do this, as well as other favors. After a certain period of time, these creditors, who were also his friends, started to worry about the extent of his expenditures. Indeed, the steward of his house, a good and faithful servant, had long been warning him about the very same thing. Every time he approached the nobleman on this matter, however, he received the same response. "Don't tell me to refuse a friend in need, for such a friend is a friend indeed. And if I should have to choose between being rich in friends and rich in money, then let me choose to be rich in friends, for as you should plainly see, if it ever came to be, my friends would stand by me." So it went on for another 2 years. The rich nobleman turned himself slowly into a poor one without even noticing it. Only when 2 of his most important creditors finally decided to call in their loans did matters come to a head. The steward of the house was able at last to make the nobleman realize that not only couldn't he pay back these loans, but that he was virtually destitute. Though the nobleman was unsettled by this news, and even shocked to find out that his affairs were in such a bad state, he didn't worry. After all, he said to himself, do I not have a large number of friends who will be happy to help me in my time of need? Do I not have many friends who will be more than willing to pay me back for all the favors I've done them in the past? So thinking, he quickly dispatched 3 of his servants to ask for certain sums of money from these great men. At numerous doors these petitioners knocked, and at numerous doors they received responses of the most discouraging sort. "I'm sorry, but my master is not in," said one servant to one of his petitioners. I'm sorry, but my master is not disposed to meet anyone at this time, said another servant to yet another petitioner. I'm sorry, but my master, even though he would dearly love to help his good friend, is in dire straits himself, said yet another servant to yet another petitioner. Thus it happened that time and time again the three servants came back to the nobleman to report to him that for one reason or another his friends were not willing to help him. Time and time again the nobleman held to the hope that some friend yet untried would redeem the others by sending him the money he desperately needed. Alas, such a thing never happened, even though his good and faithful servant did all he could to remind these same friends of what they owed the nobleman. With this state of affairs going hand in hand with increasing pressure to pay off his debts, the nobleman, for perhaps the first time in his life, lost his composure. What? Are these men who now refuse me the same who came to my well-laid table week after week? Are these the same who with their smiling, fawning faces accepted my favors while promising me that if ever I should be in need, their help would be forthcoming even without my asking for it? The vehemence with which the nobleman uttered these words made his servants tremble. Now some no longer were in doubt about which course to follow. They stole off from his house like rats leaving a sinking ship. Pretty soon only the steward and a few other servants were left behind to manage things. In the meantime, the nobleman locked himself in his room and didn't speak to a soul. 3 days passed without anyone seeing him. On the 4th day, he emerged from his room looking stern but otherwise calm and collected. The few servants that were still in the house were summoned by him and ordered to go to a number of his friends with invitations to a banquet. Inform them that recent developments have made things not so bad for me as they first appeared. Let them know that in point of fact, my affairs have greatly improved, and I'm on my way to a full recovery. Extend my apologies for having troubled them recently for money which I no longer need. Tell them finally that I request their attendance at a banquet celebrating this wonderful turn of events. With no small amount of perplexity, the servants did as requested. They called upon a select number of the nobleman's friends. In every instance, the reception was one of initial wariness, followed by surprise, and then finally by relief and even excitement and interest. "What's this you say?" said one of them. "His coffers are full again? His state is secure? Surely there have been some remarkable dealings here that any astute businessman might like to know about." When another received the invitation, he exclaimed, "Ah, what luck! He's back on his feet again and ready to entertain and perhaps even help out his friends as he formerly did." A third, who happened to be surprised by one of the servants while he was sneaking out of his house, said, "Well, you know, in a way I'm sorry to hear this, for recently I've had a change of heart, and in fact I've come to the conclusion that I shouldn't have refused his request for money, Dear me, you won't believe this, but I was just on my way to deliver it to him now. The day of the banquet came, and every single friend who had been called upon by the servants showed up for it. At the long banquet table, they took their regular seats and showed the same mirth and good cheer as ever. Various steaming pots made of gold and silver were set on the table before them. At last the nobleman presented himself. With a broad smile, he welcomed his friends and expressed his pleasure over the fact that not one of them had refused his invitation. What did it matter now, he said, that each and every one of them had refused his request for help in his hour of need? That hour being past, all that mattered was he now knew them for what they were. "And what are we, sir?" said one of his friends, who was still acting merry. "A pack of vipers," roared the nobleman as he lunged towards the table, tore the cover off the biggest pot, and began throwing hot water at them. "Here, take this, you," he shouted as they scrambled madly away from the table. "Do you see what I think of you now? Do you see how worthy I find you? Does this water that I now serve you not prove how highly I regard you as friends?" "He's mad," shouted one of his former friends before running out of the banquet room. "There'll be severe consequences for this unprovoked act," shouted another, who was no less eager to get away. "We came here in good faith," shouted a third, before receiving a ladle of hot water in the face. Blinded by the scalding water, his shrieks and cries brought pity to the heart of one of the servants who was watching the horrible scene and who now saw his master as he had never seen him before. "From this day forward, I forswear all contact with humankind. A lion, a wolf, a bear is fierce, but does not deceive. It does not feign love where there is nothing but appetite and desire for gain. Oh, my heart is too heavy for words. That I love them and have been so badly treated by them is hateful. Hateful then shall I forever be of the creature called man." At this point, Ben stops in his story. Indeed, it is not clear to the girls whether he has finished or whether he is merely taking a pause. "Ben, you have this habit of cutting your stories short." "I think I agree with Ruth on this point," says Sally. True to his word, the nobleman left everything behind and went out into the wilderness. No longer was he noble, but more like a wild animal. Certainly he lived like a wild animal and acted like one any time anyone dared to approach him. How bad could such a situation get, you might ask? How far could it go in this direction of turning against all humanity? Well, if you stop to think that the only person who was ever true to him was his steward, and that this steward was willing to help him even in his most abject state, and that furthermore he was fiercely driven away by him, then what sort of conclusion must be drawn? I think he must have gone mad, says Sally. That's the only thing that can explain why he didn't recognize the one true friend he had. Perhaps that would be the right conclusion if he lived today, says Ben. But in his time, servants weren't recognized as friends, no matter how loyal they were. A nobleman could only have another nobleman as a friend. And what about a noble woman? Asked Ruth. Wasn't she capable of being a friend? Well, what I want to know, forgive the interruption, is what the nobleman did out in the wilderness. Did he just eat berries and nuts? As a matter of fact, he rooted around like a wild pig for his food. And while he was doing this one day, he discovered a lot of buried gold. But he was so committed now to being against humanity that even this didn't tempt him. I take it, says Ruth, he didn't use this gold to clear away his debts and go back living as he did before. But he couldn't have got his friends back even with this gold, says Sally. After all, he'd thrown hot water in their faces. Well, let me tell you the rest of the story. Some of his friends heard about the gold and came to see him in the wilderness. They did their utmost to get him to come back to where he had lived and resume his former position in society. But of course he'd have nothing to do with them or their proposal. Instead he mocked them, ridiculed them, and heaped all kinds of abuse on them. But so caught up were they in the idea of somehow getting their hands on his gold that only by physically attacking them did he drive them away. I find it hard to understand people like that, says Sally. So you might be wondering now what he did with the gold, says Ben. I'd say he reburied it, says Ruth. Yes, only the gold didn't stay buried very long. When the chance came to strike back at those who were his friends and who still coveted this gold, he put it to use very quickly. Meaning what exactly? Asked Ruth. It so happened that a general with an army came to where he was living in the wilderness. When he found out where the general was headed and what he planned to attack, he willingly, no, I should say he eagerly, gave him the gold. I think I'm getting the picture, says Ruth. Where the general was headed was where his friends lived. Did they get killed? Asked Sally. At this point, Ben's cell phone rings. He quickly pulls it out of his pocket.